Hey, you lovely lot, and welcome back to Crime Analyst and Crime Analyst YouTube channel. I am so grateful for you being here. I want to just start off by thanking you. Thank you for watching my videos. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for staying with Ellen Greenberg's case. It really is such an important case, and I appreciate your super thanks more than words can say. Every little bit counts and helps, and it also makes me know that you value what I do. And look, it's really important we have independent expert voices when it comes to cases, and particularly unresolved cases, cases that haven't been adjudicated, or to unravel patterns or dynamics going on, because it helps people identify things happening in their own lives, and it can change and save lives. And look, I know that there's so many true crime content creators out there for you to choose from, and that's why I feel very humbled that you've chosen to watch my videos and to listen to Crime Analyst. Expert opinions really do matter. It can move the needle on the case. Or like I said, there are lots of people who create content and often they overlook coercive control because they've never heard of it. They don't know what it is. They repeat false narratives, things that maybe they've read on Wiki or in different places, and they regurgitate that same old narrative that often is misogynistic. So I really value you being here and spending your time watching and listening to me and also acknowledging my hard work. It does take a lot of time to analyze a case and to produce content, but also bring you the best guests, to bring you other experts, which brings me to Sarah. So in this interview, you're going to hear my conversation with Sarah Cailean, who's a homicide investigator, and she's also a criminal analyst. You may have seen her in the Hulu Docuseries Death in Apartment 603, What Happened to Ellen Greenberg. When I saw her on that, I wanted to reach out and talk to her. So you're going to hear our conversation raw. I think it's very important in terms of some of the things that we talk about, that it will educate you specifically about coercive control and some of the things that I find deeply concerning about Ellen Greenberg's case. And also, don't forget to hit subscribe. So click the button so that you don't miss part 2, because yes, there is another part to this interview. Okay, let's dive into Ellen Greenberg's case, this disturbing hidden homicide. Today, I have a very special guest who has jumped on at very short notice because I really wanted to speak with her. Sarah, please introduce yourself.
Hi. Hello, everybody out there. My name is Sarah Cailean. I am a cold case homicide investigator and criminal behaviorist. I come originally from a background in law enforcement. I was a patrol officer and then sex crimes detective for about 10 years. I started federally and then switched over to municipal policing. But when I went into policing, the goal for me was always to end up at a place where I was working in criminal psychology and working specifically on serial homicide and serial offenders and looking at ways that their patterns escalate and trying to find ways to maybe intervene sooner, which again is something that kind of parallels your work. To kind of like try and catch them sooner so that there are fewer victims at the end. And in the course of that and all of my work with serial offense and sexual offenses, I also found just a nonstop connection between those types of cases and domestic violence cases. And of course, as just a patrol officer working, third shift in the middle of the night, I think I probably responded to more DV calls than everything else combined over the course of that 10 years. And so it just, to me, it's there's never enough said about it. There's never enough light shown on the importance of responding appropriately and recognizing these crimes for what they are rather than this sort of like mundane everyday, sweep it under the rug that it gets treated. But I think in the media a lot too. So when Nancy Schwartzman came to me and asked if I'd be willing to kind of participate in this project she was doing, I leapt at it. Obviously, I love her work, and I was really honored to have the chance to be a part of what she was doing with Ellen's story.
Yes, and you said so many things that absolutely chime with me in so many ways. Patterns, behavior, psychology, investigation, domestic violence, how routine it is and that we just don't talk about it enough, and the investigative side, the proactive investigation to try and take a domino out and stop the escalation. That's how I always describe it. And you're talking about
Right.
Nancy Schwartzman and her incredible docuseries that's on Hulu right now, Death in Apartment 603, What Happened to Ellen Greenberg, which is where I first saw you. And I just thought, Sarah just sounds incredible. I have to talk with her. So I dropped you a little message on Instagram just saying, really good job. And that's really where this connection came from. And then little did I know that we also have Dr. Ann Burgess in common. And that was just incredible to discover. And we'll talk about Anne in a minute. But I also just want to congratulate you on your award because you are an award-winning podcaster as well, due to your investigative series. So I just want to congratulate you on that because
Mhm.
that's also a big deal.
Thank you. That's very kind. That's very kind. I'm proud of the work that we've been able to do over 3 seasons. We're actually getting ready to go into season 4. Maybe aren't getting as much attention of somebody who can come in and um, eh, just give, um, undivided attention and, like, not split focus the way a lot of cold cases have to be handled in departments that just don't have the resources or the manpower, the person power, to devote full time and attention to cold cases. And for me, that's all I do. The majority of my work now is pro bono. Departments bring me in, sometimes attorneys. I do a lot of, innocence work with Rabia Chaudhry, and so, I'm able to do that work, but, it is mostly pro bono because a lot of these agencies can't afford, to bring somebody on, and so I kind of fell backwards into the media space as a way to, pay the mortgage, and I have a kid who's ostensibly in college, but, kind of, like, keep the lights on and keep that going, and then a way to sort of marry those 2 things together, with the podcast.
Well, that's just incredible. I mean, the fact that you do pro bono and give back, and I also do a lot of pro bono as well, but you still have to, pay the rent, keep the lights on, do all of those good things. So you're spending a lot of your free minutes still helping people with cold cases, which, we will talk about Ellen Greenberg because obviously that's a 14-year effective cold case because it was determined to be a suicide and therefore wasn't really there was no real investigation into the case. But let's just quickly talk about Dr. Ann Burgess for a minute because
Yeah, please, always.
I recently interviewed Anne. I mean, I have multiple times now. And one of the things that, as I was starting out at New Scotland Yard, when I was in the sexual offences section there, I read a lot of Anne's work. And I was just blown away when I met her. I mean, many years later, to talk about the Menendez case, meeting one of my sheroes was just incredible. And, one of the things that just struck me was that, yes, I started out with stranger rape, murder, and abduction cases. And I realized that many of those men that we were hunting actually had a history of domestic abuse. And so I decided, what if we profile them backwards, reverse engineer what I can find out about them in terms of what a risk profile looks like and put it into a set of questions for law enforcement so that when she attends the 999 call on a late, windy, rainy morning, what question does our female officer ask the victim? And that was always what my boss set me. That was the task. What questions do they ask to try and prevent an escalation to murder? And so that preventative lens came in very early into my career. And one of the things that really chimed with me about Anne's work was the fact that she was doing exactly the same, but obviously has a much longer established history. And she was really the person behind a lot of the data, the analysis, and the behavioral analysis units, which just incredible work. But you also, at the start of your career, you met Anne or you ended up speaking with Anne and she advised you on a case. But can you just tell my listeners a little bit about that Blibberry? Because we both share her as a shero who's been very meaningful in our careers.
I didn't actually meet Anne until much later in my career, but I had sort of like worshipped from afar almost from the beginning. I started in federal law enforcement with the Department of the Interior. And when I started at the academy, which would have been, I think, 97 or 98, John Douglas's book, Mindhunter, had only just recently come out, and it's very different for people who haven't read the book. It's different than the show. It's much more case study heavy. But I did notice Anne's name pop up a couple of times, and sort of the degree of involvement that she had, I figured might be more than what was coming through in the book. And so I too just started looking into her work, looking into her background with rape trauma, investigation techniques, and was just blown away. And so I just sort of started following her career. I started reading everything she wrote. I would attend conferences if she was nearby. I just kind of wanted to learn from her as much as possible. And that continued when I left active policing and went into academic research. I kind of continued that and then started doing case consultancy work about 7 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. But 6 years ago, somebody asked me to take over the investigation of a particularly violent sexual homicide with a lot of mutilation and dismemberment, and I felt like I was ill-equipped to handle that without a good support structure of somebody who had worked this type of case before. And so I had been kind of like gazing lovingly at her email address for years, but never really felt like I had an excuse to bother her. And then, when I took over that case, I thought, oh, this is it. And I wonder if she'd be interested in even speaking to me for 5 minutes. And so I, fired off an email, and she called me almost immediately and not only worked with me on that case, but we've been working together on cases all over the world ever since. We developed a cold case team together, and I am just beyond lucky to call her, a mentor and a colleague, and I think, dare I say, friend. She's just incredible.
She truly is. I feel exactly the same way, and she's so generous with her time.
Yeah.
I talked to her about coercive control, and she said, "Oh, that's a very interesting concept." And we started to talk about different serial killer cases because I said to her, "I've seen it in every serial case, and often it's invisible. People don't really see what it is. But of course, psychopathy is about power and control. It's about domination, and therefore it makes sense." And we also talked about the fact the psychopathy checklist doesn't have it in there, doesn't have power and control,
Yes.
the very thing that is the motivator. So I think there's still a huge amount of work to do. And I think, Sarah, that often this is the difference between work that men and women do and what behavioral profilers see as men and women. We see different things. And it can be very complementary. But where we've had men dominate and lead the field, I feel that there's still a lot of work for us to do, particularly, as women, the things that we see and our voices being heard in terms of the academic literature, but also in terms of, podcasting and at conferences and things like CrimeCon. We really do need more women there. And in particular, like I said, the psychopathy checklist, I really do think it is missing the very crux of what motivates these very dangerous individuals and what they are trying to achieve. And it's often that coercive and controlling domination that they need to have to feel something, to,
Yeah.
fill a void in them. And often people don't see that. If they're wholehearted, they don't understand that. But women do because we're often at the receiving end of it.
That I think boy, you just nailed it too, because when you say they're wholehearted, and I think the other thing to make sure everybody gets the point is whole conscienced, right? Like we're there the we talk to so many people who say, well, they have to be sick or they have to be insane, they have to be all this stuff. And it's like, no, they're really not. But you're viewing it from the lens of somebody who does have a conscience and who does have empathy. And it's very difficult if you have not, really unfortunately kind of drowned yourself in these types of psyches. It's very difficult to see it as a type of normal. It's not obviously a normal that we would want for anybody, but it is a type of normal. And I think to your point too, it's the lived experience is a lot of the value that comes from women in all careers. I mean, in everything, but particularly not just in law enforcement, but in crime scene analysis. And, I'm sure you'll want to talk about this, but that for me, when I was listening to your interview of Nancy and you were talking about like the value of going to the place, and for me, I was just like shouting yes at my podcast in the car because I was just like, that is it. And for me, it's almost always about that. No matter how much I've studied a case, it's when I get on the scene and all like these little pieces just drop into place and like a little movie plays in my head and I know exactly how it went down. And with domestic violence homicide, it's that lived experience, it's that understanding of how that dynamic plays out. Even if, in healthy relationships, there's still a dynamic that's playing out. And to get on the scene and go, "Oh, I know what happened here. I knew exactly what happened here." And you pointed out all the same stuff, the ring on the counter, this and that. I was like, "Nope, she took that ring off and that was it." You know?
Absolutely. And we are going to pivot into Ellen. And just to underline the point that you just made, male perpetrated abuse towards women. And often what we're seeing with serial killers and the scenes that we attend, women are primarily and predominantly the victims, and the perpetrator is predominantly a male. And that's why it's so important to have the female, the woman expert lens and the contemporary lens of modern day analysis like coercive control. There are laws all in the UK now, in Australia, and Canada brought the law in 2021. We have to modernize and update the law. But what we see at crime scenes reflects. And yes, when I go to a scene, and that's what I loved about what Nancy did, and I'm going to ask you about the process for you. For me, being able to see in that apartment and listen to what you were saying, have my own questions, see the crime scene photos myself, which I hadn't seen up until that point,
Mm.
matching it back with the 911. It is like a mini movie that you have playing in your head, and you compare it against lots of other scenes that you've seen, and you can, you know, if I was there, I'd be testing things out. You test out the latch, for example. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself because I
Oh boy, the latch.
need back to the very beginning of, and I thought you were brilliant in the docuseries. You really did stand out to me, which is why I messaged you. Um, I wanted to ask you, first of all, when did you become aware of Ellen's case? When was it on your radar? Because now there's a national profile. And when I first started digging into it, there wasn't. And in fact, it was very hard to find anybody who might be able to talk from a point of knowledge about the case. Of course, the docuseries now, it's #1 on Hulu. I'm so happy. So congratulations to Nancy, to you, to everybody who played a part in it, because it was a brave decision to take, a non-adjudicated case and to really have a very rigorous re-examination. I want to call it a re-investigation, but never was an investigation. But this is really the first time we're seeing all the different parts of the case brought together. But when did you first become aware of Ellen Greenberg?
It's interesting actually. So I went to college in Philadelphia originally back in the very early 90s. Before I went into law enforcement, I was in professional theater. I went to drama school in Philadelphia. And I left, like I said, to go into law enforcement. And I lived actually in London for a little while, and then I was over in. We have so much to talk about.
We really do.
And then I actually did the bulk of my law enforcement career in the Midwest. I was outside of Columbus, Ohio. Um, I had just returned to Philadelphia. I was like back in school full time. I was doing all this academic research. I am an East Coast girl through and through, and I kind of missed being back out here. So I moved back to Philadelphia in 2011. Not it was later in the year. Ellen was killed in January. I think I moved back, in the fall. But at that point, there was Stephanie. Stephanie was covering it a lot for the Philadelphia Inquirer. There was coverage happening locally, and there was a lot of kind of back and forth about this weird case. And so I've been aware of it almost from the beginning, and I've taken issue with the suicide determination really from jump.
Very interesting. Yes, there was local coverage. Stephanie Farr did a fantastic job, but no real national lens on it. And have you ever seen a case like Ellen's before?
It's interesting. I was thinking about this morning. I'm in New York right now, but I do live in Philly, so I was driving up from Philly to Brooklyn, and I was thinking about this. And what's interesting, I had as an officer, I responded to 2 different, suicide attempts. One was successful, one was not, of self-inflicted stab wounds. And those had both taken place shortly after, the singer Elliott Smith had died by suicide of self-inflicted stab wounds. And I had, been a big fan of his music and stuff, so I was aware of that. And then it was within about a month of each other, I had these 2 back to back that I responded to. And I've never seen all of those, and this is purely anecdotal. So of course, I mean, I'm obviously not trying to assert that this is, documented by science, but everything I've ever experienced and seen, it is pretty rare. It was always men in the cases that I've looked at, and it was always an abdominal wound. Is I believe Elliott Smith's might have been chest and abdomen, and then the 2 that I responded to were both, abdominal. The other thing that I found interesting about them, and I too have examined, Ellen's crime scene photos pretty thoroughly, and there is a lot of blood, but it is fairly contained within that area, in the corner of the kitchen. It's all sort of right there. And again, I don't have anything but anecdotal evidence to support this, but the ones that I saw and the scenes I responded to, even though there were far fewer wounds, the scene was much more chaotic. Because I think if you can imagine the pain I mean, it's just unbelievably painful and drawn out. And so there is all this kind of physical moving as the body is kind of trying to stop the mind from going through with this. And both of the scenes I responded to looked like brutal homicides that where there had been a massive struggle. There was just kind of blood everywhere. And this I did not see at Ellen's scene. So even though there was tremendous blood loss or 20 stab wounds, um, uh, it didn't look like those same scenes that I had been on previously.
Interesting. And with those scenes, no stab wounds to the back of the head or the neck. They were all
No, the 2 that I responded to were both abdominal. And like I said, I believe Elliott Smith's was abdominal and maybe chest.
yeah.
But again, all in the front and all men. You know, men die by suicide oftentimes differently than women do. So for whatever that's worth.
Yes. And, I want to ask you about your process with Ellen's case because you obviously had access to the crime scene photos. You actually went to the apartment, which was huge for me to be able
Mhm.
to see in there. What was the first starting point for you of your process of analyzing the case? Did you start with victimology or the 911 call or the crime scene photos, or what was the very first entry point for you? And can you just talk through that process?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you and I both came up at the knee of Ann Burgess, I start with victimology. And I start with trying to know as much about this victim as a human being, as a complex human being, not bullet points, not how old were they, where did they work, what were they wearing? I want to dive a lot deeper. I want to know what their favorite movie was. I want to know stuff like, what her friend said in the documentary about she was particularly averse to pain. I mean, nobody likes pain, but that this was like wouldn't get her ears pierced stuff. I want to know that stuff. Because then I can tell what fits and what doesn't fit, right? Like as you're looking for pattern and analysis, like what makes sense and what doesn't. Um, Once I have sort of a handle on that, I mean, it's different if I'm leading an investigation, then I go through a whole, I've got a color code on my files and stuff, but I didn't have to do any of that for this. But um, I want to know about the suspect as well. I want to know as much as I can about him. So I did as much research as I could without, I mean, I'm not using police authority for something like that. So I did as much based on public record searches and some kind of just little systems I know how to use. And if I was investigating it, there were some people I found in his background who I would like to speak with and kind of find out their impressions and their experience of potential coercive control to, your language, by the way, is so perfect. And I do wish we would adopt it here in the States. Um, because I think
on
you
it, Sarah,
see,
working
I know you are.
with a number
I know.
of advocates, and I'm hoping you're going to join the cause as well to start to
100%. Anything I can do.
thank
But,
you.
then start to actually examine the evidence and start to look at, as many of the text messages as I could, and, I mean, I don't know about you, but I certainly found indications of that, that sort of like that cycle of love bombing and then the guilting and they're, kind of creating this sort of clingy nature from her. I was like, "Oh boy, this is textbook." Um and I just, from there, getting to go into the scene, to look at the crime scene photos and then get to go to the scene and just try and see if you can get that little movie to pop up on the the screen in my mind.
Yeah, and I listened very attentively as well to the friends and family members um, to build that picture of victimology. And I was also interested in the pain element because, as you quite rightly said, the way she died was incredibly painful. I mean, just one stab wound is painful and you have a reflex, but to have 10 to the back of your head and your neck, I've never seen that before. And then a continuation in the front where two of them could possibly lead to death. We know the one in the chest absolutely would. And we'll come to the one that, pierced through, I think, to 1.1 centimeter, which a number of experts, Dr. Emery and Dr. Wayne Ross, opined that she most likely would have been dead at that point.
Yeah.
And they
And
said,
or completely physically incapacitated. Yeah.
yeah, with a
That
high
I don't
degree of medical certainty, which I thought was very interesting. So I'm going to ask you just about, some of what Dr. Wayne Ross and other experts opine, because obviously for me, I always look at their reports as well, of trying to understand a crime scene and what happened. So the pain issue, didn't even want her ears pierced, but also I heard her friends talk about her being a people pleaser, which I know so many girls and women are, because it's how we're groomed to be like water, to be malleable, to meet everybody's needs. But the minute I hear people pleaser and I hear a friend describe Sam as attentive, attentiveness is something that I'm always very curious about, because there's a very fine line between being attentive and being controlling, of micro managing somebody, of attending to everything that they're doing, where you think, oh, well, I'm special and they're really looking out for me, where actually they're micromanaging you and they might look like they're caring for you, but it's a way to control you.
Yeah.
So we're hearing the people pleaser side about Ellen, hearing him being attentive, seeing the text messages that he had sent Ellen when he was allegedly trying to get in the door. You know, when he had told one of the first responders that she had mental health problems and so on, were those text messages are not congruent with being caring or compassionate and being concerned about someone's mental health. They were actually threatening of, you better have a good experience.
Extremely. You have no idea, he said. Oof.
Very unusual to,
Yeah.
see that messaging. Yes, you might be frustrated, you're outside the door, but if you're genuinely concerned about someone's welfare, which is what his story was to first responders, I would expect to see evidence consistent with that. And so
Yeah.
these little things which a lot of people miss, they're tiny details. And it's like building a house, isn't it? You're just putting the foundation and you're trying to get a good understanding of victimology and the relationship dynamic. And one of the things I also was intrigued by hearing that Nancy said they didn't spend that much time together because he was traveling a lot. So when I asked her about the neighbor hearing, Sam banging down the door, which sounded a bit performative to me, but, that's subjective entirely. That's just my impression that I formed. When I said to Nancy, oh, Mark Hemricks was interesting and he talked about that, did he ever tell you about any other arguments? And she said, oh, no, but it doesn't surprise me because Sam was traveling a lot. And so then that made me think about the fact that they got together and then got engaged. I just wondered, how well did they really know each other when Janevier's on the road? I mean, I was on the road a lot at New Scotland Yard, and even when I left, I was always with a wheelie bag going from, different place up north to Wales, and always on the road. So it's very hard to have a relationship with someone when you're constantly, for your job, moving around. And therefore, if you have a relationship, you might not know each other that well. And therefore, when you propose and now you've got this pressure of, the save the date and when the wedding's going to be. And it could actually create even more tension.
Mhm.
And I just wondered about Sam, given this attentiveness. And, you mentioned love bombing and looking at text messages. But it just seems to me with Ellen's change in behavior, and again, hearing from friends, the turtlenecks coming in, she wore spaghetti straps before. She, wasn't a large person, but I can see pictures where she's clearly lost weight. And, the smiley Ellen with her family to who she is when she's with Sam, she has lost quite a lot of weight. And again, I was just curious about that. Was there anything that you saw about or heard in the making of the docuseries or information you were given just about, weight loss or that transition of going from bubbly, happy Ellen to being withdrawn and not as interactive with her friends?
That for me was much bigger. I think, I mean, I always try and play devil's advocate as much as possible, right? Like, let's try and take out as many factors as could plausibly um point to something else, right? So it's like, okay, she's got a wedding coming up. A lot of women get really stressed out by that, and you either lose weight deliberately or not even deliberately. But the the complete change of her personality is pretty telling. And I was thinking, again, I was actually just thinking about this in the car this morning, listening to your interview with Nancy. Um, it's this whole thing where the other teachers were saying like she keeps talking about how stressed out she is, and we can see that in text messages with Sam. He'll say, "What's wrong?" And she's like, "I'm really stressed about work." And her family, she's saying, "I'm really stressed about work." And the teachers are like, "That's weird because it really wasn't that stressful." And it's possible that there was sort of a transference of that in her mind that she didn't know she was doing. It's also possible, and this is the thing that I can't let go of, that she was managing him. And if you are scared or even intimidated or doubting whether or not you want to be with this person, but you're not 100% sure that you're safe or that even emotionally, even if there has not been previous physical violence, that he's going to be a jerk about it, you're going to try and find a way to manage that and excuse why you are so different, right? So if you are feeling different, now you're going to say, "Oh, it's just because of work, babe. I'm stressed out because of work. It's, because you're managing up." And whether it's emotional abuse or physical abuse or a combination, the victims are constantly trying to manage the abuser in order to keep the peace. And that to me was what I was seeing in the constant talk about work being that hard. When, it is. I know that school. I know, teachers in the Philadelphia school district. It's a stressful environment. There's no doubt. And it may not have been what she wanted, or what she thought she wanted going into it. But I think that constant, just like everything is terrible. Oh, it's just because of this first grade class that I'm with half the day. I think that to me spoke a lot more about being concerned about Sam's just general mood all the time.
Yeah, and it is exhausting when you're constantly managing your behavior through someone else's lens and treading on, walking on eggshells, this kind of nervous anxiety. And I think, I mean, the weight loss for me, if there were weight loss, and only her friends would really know that, yes, you could put it down to wanting to look good in a wedding dress, right? Lots of women go through that process, but it's and. It's all the other things. It's
Yeah.
the personality change. And I agree with you. Often we project things or deflect it onto something else, the easier thing that we can talk to other people about. And, I think Nancy raised it, the pressure of getting married. Once that train's left the station, everyone's excited about it. The wedding dress, the families are excited about it. And let's say you really understand this person isn't who you thought they were. Now there's a lot of pressure on you because I thought it was very interesting that she was saying she wanted to move back to her parents.
Yeah.
She wasn't saying, I just want out of the job. She's actually saying, I want out. I want to leave, full stop. And it's what she's not saying in that I would.
Yeah, she's loved Philadelphia. To just suddenly decide I wanna move back to I mean, Harrisburg is, lovely for what it is, but it's no Philadelphia. And for her to have gone there and really, like, explored, found this whole new life, to want to leave permanently, that's, that's not happening because you didn't like one first grade class.
Right. And, any person who she would speak with would of course say, well, you can change jobs. I mean, I know her dad said, well, see a
Right.
psychiatrist, don't make any rash moves, talk it through. But any first job we go into, we know we're not going to be in it for the rest of our lives, most likely, right? So some of that pressure could be alleviated, but it's the fact that no one really questioned her about leaving the job or leaving Sam, because that's what I would be asking her. And of course, I'm a trained professional, but it's that elephant in the room of that level of stress that's coming from something her friends and colleagues say, really, it's not that stressful, points in the direction that there's a lot more going on in the relationship. Um, you know,
Well, it's also interesting that she never said to him, "Can we be based out of Harrisburg? I'd like to be closer to my family. I don't want to do this job anymore. You travel, so you could be anywhere." She never raised any of that with him, which to me is also this other big flag that it's like, no, she's leaving him, not Philadelphia.
yeah. And that is the thing for me, the big area that we can speculate on, but often it's what's absent in my work. It's the omissions, and I'm sure it's the same for you. Um, it's just such a shame, and that's why friends and family are they're so important when we educate people about coercive control, because these are the almost invisible signs. And I've talked to so many family members who just say, I just wish I had asked about this. And this is in the wake of a homicide. When a woman's been killed, she did tell me X, Y, and Z. I just wish I had asked about this or leaned in harder. So what I try and do in my work now is spotlight these areas to help people, because they might have a daughter going through exactly the same, to help them have these conversations, because it could save a life, particularly when you've got someone who's young and, you know, they're impressionable. They might be naive about relationships, may not have had many boyfriends, etc. So, it's a life-saving conversation as well. It's not just, looking at what happened potentially in Ellen's case. Hey, lovely. I'm jumping in here to wrap part one of this fascinating and illuminating interview. And as I said, there is another part to it. So don't forget to hit subscribe so that you get that automatically in your feed. And I just want to underline the importance of everybody understanding what the early warning signs of coercive control look like, and also what the high risk factors look like and how women can become entrapped by men. It's very important that we have women like me, experts on male violence and coercive control to women, to explain those dynamics. And if you want more, you can join my masterclasses. I have got a number left between now and the end of the year. I've already run 3 classes, so you've missed those. And these are the fee-based ones. And there's the Dash Masterclass on October the 29th and 30th. That's the domestic abuse, stalking and harassment, and honor-based violence risk identification, assessment, and management model. It's a mouthful. That's why it's called the Dash Masterclass training, where I unravel coercive control and domestic abuse and the macro picture, the grooming patriarchy of how she got into the situation by a male perpetrator. She was primed before she even met him. And I unravel all of that, the high risk factors, the early warning signs, and the profile of the perpetrators and their psychopathology. I did some of the first work of looking at the offenders, looking at all the intelligence and everything we held at New Scotland Yard. And I wrote various reports about that. And it's in my book, Policing Domestic Violence. So I share that with you all in my Dash Masterclass training. I've got Dash Train the Trainer on November the 12th and 13th if you want to go on and be university accredited to train others in the tool. Stalking is on December the 4th. Victimology, how victims are targeted, the impact on them, the risk factors, and the profile of the stalkers. And coercive control is on December the 10th and 11th. These are very detailed classes. And importantly, it's 10 years since I changed the law on coercive control in England and Wales, that successful campaign. And I'll be saying more about that in December. And I'm still here changing laws in America, in Australia, because I think it is so important. These early warning shots that something could escalate to murder, I want that criminalized. I want offenders to know that's not okay, and for there to be accountability and responsibility taking. There has to be a consequence. And we've seen the femicide rate skyrocket. So I talk about all of that in my expert-led training. And if you want to join, you can click the link in the show notes, or you can email laurarichardspa@gmail.com. And these classes really are life-saving and life-changing, as well as all my videos. Do go back and watch the rest of the videos on Ellen and the Murdoch murders and all the other cases where I've been unraveling coercive control and psychopaths and their psychopathology, because I want to save and change lives. And I've heard from so many of you that the dash or my training or something that you heard me talk about coercive control, that it woke you up and made you realize that you were in a very dangerous situation. And some of you have told me that I not only changed your life, but I saved your life. And I can't tell you the feeling that I get, complete chills when I hear that. And it makes me walk 10 foot taller, because it means it's worth me doing this, talking into the camera and sharing this information with you. It's exactly why I do what I do. So please keep sharing my content with other people. You never know what's really going on for someone behind closed doors. Please keep sharing your stories with me in your comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Okay, until next time, be curious, ask questions, and always trust your instincts.